you appreciate less and less, and you feel that they owe you more and more. And that, if they're your partner, your husband, your wife, then they should do this. You stop seeing them as their own person, and you see them as somebody who's supposed to fulfill all of your wants, desires, needs, hopes, dreams, etc. And the big danger here is when you lose appreciation through a lot of expectation, for instance, you feel like the love is lost. And it's not lost, you just can't access it anymore.
Welcome back to Happiness in Progress. I'm your host, Danielle Craig. I'm an Emmy Award winner, former journalist, mom, wife, and just a person looking for more joy in the everyday. This podcast is brought to you by the Mail Tribune. You can find more podcasts at mailtribune.com. And if you like listening or watching, if you're watching on YouTube, please take a moment to rate this podcast and to subscribe. If you subscribe, you will not miss an episode, and we have some really good ones for you coming up. Okay, I want to introduce you to today's guest, Monika Berg. She is an international spiritual thought leader and the author of the brand new book out today, Rethink Love, Being the One, Attracting the One, and Becoming One. She is the Chief Communications Officer at the Kabbalah Centre. She is a self-proclaimed change junkie, and I'm really excited to share this conversation with you. I loved chatting with Monika. I could have chatted with her probably the rest of the day. The book is so good. It has so many good lessons and takeaways for us. But here's what we talked about. A lot about why it's so important to embrace yourself within a relationship before you get into that relationship. We also talked about being okay with the internal feedback instead of the external feedback, plus how being afraid of change impacts a relationship and some of the illusions we have about relationships and marriage. That's just a tiny slice of it. There's a lot of good stuff here in this interview, so let's get to it. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. I'm so excited to talk to you.
Me too. Thanks for having me.
So your new book, Rethink Love, comes out on Valentine's Day. Why is it important that people start rethinking love?
Love is complicated. And even if people feel like they've found love, it's such an area where there's tremendous growth and possibility. And I think that people spend a lot of time finding the one and searching for the one and then starting a life with them. But then the investment and the energy that they had put in getting that person kind of wanes during the relationship. And relationships aren't something that can just be on the side. Very often we start to take our partners for granted, we lose appreciation, and we stop investing. And so there's so many tools and tips that a person can do. And it's really mostly a shift in consciousness, which is why the rethink really comes in, where they can live their best life. Because the truth of the matter is, we all know this, relationships can either elevate us and make us tremendously happy and fulfilled. And also at some point, they tend not to, right? And it can be, in some cases, very tumultuous and very difficult and very painful. Or it could just be comfortable. And that's not even enough for me.
Mm-hmm. I really like in your book how you separate it in 3 parts. And the first part is me. Why is it important that we embrace ourselves and love ourselves first before even tackling the relationship part of it?
As I'm going to explain this to you, it's going to be so obvious and say, yeah, that makes sense. But it is the most fundamental step in terms of relationships. And it's the one that actually most people miss. And it's a relationship you have with yourself. Because if you don't love yourself, or somewhere along the lines in your lifetime you forgot how to love yourself, and you don't have self-care and appreciation or respect for yourself, honor your beliefs, and know what you want, then how can you possibly, first of all, choose well, right, in terms of a partner? And also, you can't really give anything that you don't inherently possess for yourself. So I encourage everybody, doesn't matter if you're married or widowed or in your 70s, to go back to this. And that's why I devoted 9 chapters just on how to become your own best friend and really love yourself and honor your thoughts and your desires.
Mm-hmm. I can almost see somebody, maybe they were in the right place with themselves when they entered a relationship and then started losing themselves. So that's why it's so good to revisit that. Have you seen that people lose themselves within the relationship?
The second part of the book is going from me to we. And it's how to maintain yourself and who you are and what you believe while starting a new life with somebody else where you are joining so many things together and you become intertwined. But how do you stay on to what you believe? I find that people lose themselves when they really never knew what they believed in the first place. You may know what you like, you may know what attracts you, what interests you, but to really know what you believe and to stand on your own terms and say, this is who I am, without being feared of being ostracized or allowing yourself to be vulnerable and authentic. Again, you can think you've mastered all those things, but when you start a relationship with somebody else, and again, it depends on how it started or who you're drawn to, those things can really fall to the side and it can shake you up, right? And unless you're really aware and you're paying attention, then you might find yourself further along in the relationship and say, okay, well, how did I get here? I don't even recognize myself anymore. So the second part is devoted to that, how to, and there's so many tips in that section too, like cherished illusions and Cinderella syndrome, that we all have these illusions about what a marriage or a relationship will bring us, right? And things that we're not, again, if you're not aware of what you think, then it's easy to fall into this.
I want to come back to the illusions in just a second, but first I want to go back to me. The me part of this is that validation. I think so many people are trying to find that external feedback instead of being okay with the internal feedback. Can you tell me how that impacts a relationship?
It's so important. Well, it's interesting because feedback is something that is nice and that we need, right? Feedback is telling somebody else, give me information to help make me better, right? We all enjoy that kind of feedback if we're open. Validation is help make me better, right? So there's inherently something wrong with you and you're relying on this outside source to make you whole, to make you better, to make you fulfilled. And that can never happen. If you can't give that to yourself, certainly nobody else can give that to you. But also it's incredibly unfair to do that to your partner because it's something that they just possibly cannot do. And when we seek that, the danger for the person seeking it is that, for instance, let's say you never felt beautiful at all until you met this person and he made you feel confident and loved and he valued so much, he valued you. And suddenly now you're like, wow, I feel really pretty. I like how I feel about myself. Now, let's say now he thinks you're not, right? Or he's no longer in your life. Well, then you're not going to feel good about yourself again. So that validation, again, it needs to come from you. But when you assign somebody else to give it, it's fleeting. It's not going to last.
Right. How does somebody get on the road to validating themselves?
So it starts with being able to drown out the noise and opinions of other people. And what happens through life, and people don't realize this, and it's to different degrees for many. Some will be more invested than others, but we have usually the voice of our parents in our heads, right? So if you were raised in a home where there was a lot of shame or regret, you should have done this or you're wrong about that. Well, when you make a mistake in life, that's going to be the voice that you hear. That's what's going to be in your consciousness. But there's a softer, kinder voice, which is the voice of your soul. And when we stop listening to what it is we think, we believe, we desire, it almost becomes inaudible until you can't hear it at all anymore. And all you do hear then is either the negative voices, which now become your beliefs and your belief systems, and also if you've been raised or you've learned that other people are the authority over you. And again, people fall into this, right? The doctor is the authority of your health. The police officer is the authority of your safety. The lawyer is, so we assign all of these professionals really to tell us what to do, right? Now, of course, there's a time where you need outside perspective and opinion, but then you need to take that information and then ask yourself, does this feel right for me, right? And then when you do that, then that voice becomes louder and then you're able to make better choices for yourself.
And this is all part of embracing our true selves. What if someone, that's one of the parts of your book I highlighted, embrace our true selves. For the listener, what is the first step to doing that? Embracing our true selves.
The best way to start something new and to embrace something new is you have to create a space for it, right? So first, you really do need to remove the things that are influencing you negatively. Maybe it's your environment, maybe it's your choice of friends, but it's that thing that makes you keep questioning who you are. Like, oh, did I make a mistake? And you're worried about that, right? You're really invested. So it's little steps every single day. So you wake up in the morning, you write this in a journal that I want to connect to who I really am. This is what I set out to do today, right? And then I recently wrote a blog about this, about being mindful, because people talk about mindfulness all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But I had this epiphany during New Year's, actually, that, I mean, I consider myself mindful, but I realized that I was constantly thinking about the next thing, the next goal, the next achievement, and I wasn't enjoying this moment, right? So to be mindful is like, right now, I'm here talking to you. I'm with you right now in this time that we have together. I'm not thinking about anything else. I'm not anywhere else. I'm not worried about anything else. So if a person is able to, each step of the day, every hour, check in with themselves, ask themselves the question, how do I feel about what I'm doing, how I'm spending my time, where I'm putting my energy? Is it true to who I want to be, who I want to become? Right? Because we're so invested in to-do lists. I want to encourage people to create to-be lists. Focus on who you want to be, and then that's where you're going to put your energy and your impact. You're also, by doing that, you're able to identify the areas that try to drag you out of that space, right? If somebody else has an agenda, can you help me do this? Or they rely on you to do certain things, which really don't, they're not part of who you really are, what you want to achieve. You're able then to recognize it, but you can only do that by asking yourself that question every day. How can I show up for my soul's purpose?
Oh, I love that. And since we're talking about relationships, how will that make our relationship or our marriage better?
So when you're able to do that, you're able to elevate the relationship as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
And when you make yourself be accountable by checking in, you also are making your partner be accountable. So it's interesting because your partner will ask you throughout the day, and I'm sure vice versa, can you do this for me? Or will you do me that favor? Or, can we go to this dinner? And it's really, I mean, relationships, as beautiful as they are an opportunity for us to grow and expand, and see things in ourselves that maybe we wouldn't see before. So first, it's to know how you feel and to be able to be clear about that. And then when your partner comes in and is asking you for different things, you're able to say, I would love to do that, right? If you're in a healthy relationship, but these are my thoughts, this is what I'm kind of working with. How can we make this work for both of us? It's about being flexible in your approach.
I like that, but also being true to yourself.
Absolutely. But by being true to yourself, you're able to be flexible and to be clear and to communicate. When people, very often they can't communicate, there's a lot of frustration, or they feel resentment, or they feel they're taken advantage of because they're not first in touch with what they really desire, what they really want, right? And now I don't even know what I want, but you keep asking me for what you want, right? So you can see how that could backfire. But if you're in that space of constantly giving yourself emotional feedback and information about what you want, what you feel, then when your partner is asking you, or even not if it's selfish, just sharing a life with you, you're able to come with yourself as a whole and then invite them in a balanced way.
Oh, I love that. And that can help someone get rid of all of the things that go unsaid and that really build that resentment inside.
Yeah, because we take out our frustration on our partner and we're not even really aware of the movies, the stories, the thoughts in our heads, right? And that's when it gets very muddled.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Because you are the change junkie, I have to ask you how being afraid of change impacts a relationship.
Well, it's interesting because I love talking about change because most people, would say, I crave change, I want change, I desire change. But, do you really? We want things in our life to change, but the effort and the energy that requires a change to happen is a lot, and it's uncomfortable. Change is uncomfortable. But what I want to say to all of your listeners is that it's not a choice. We're changing in every second of every day. Like right now, you and I are both changing in ways, in physical ways, in mental ways. We're not even aware of how we're changing. So in every moment, everything's changing. But your choices, you get to either choose, do you want to go forward or do you want to go backwards? You get to direct your change. So when it comes to relationships, I think that, again, people work so hard to find the one, and then they want to just feel safe and secure. And they don't want anything to change because that is a threat. That feels uncomfortable. I worked so hard to get here. I don't want anything to be taken away from me. What I want you to think about, though, is that understanding how change works, knowing that you and your partner each will change in different ways. 10 years from now, you're going to want different things, understand different things, crave different things than you did 10 years previous. So I encourage you to pay attention to the changes that are happening every day, both in yourself and both in your partner. Talk about the things that you dream about that, what you're curious about, and help bring that out in one another. When you fear change and you try to hold your partner back, again, it's something that can't even be done. That change is going to occur, but then the change is going to divide you instead of bring you together.
Mm-hmm. One of the stories you told in the book, I just thought was so interesting about the couple trying to lose weight, and one would lose weight and then the other would be upset about it and be
That
hard on
happens
him.
a lot, right?
I
mean, because there's also so many studies about if you have, for instance, this is not me, this is science. If you have like thinner friends, you'll tend to be thinner, right? If you have friends that are smokers, you'll tend to be a smoker. Like we are, right? We are with the people that are comfortable. So this couple, they were both overweight, and that was more comfortable for the woman. And so every like few months or 6 months, that's like, okay, I'm going to go on a diet. And he would, and then she would become mean and nasty, and he would sabotage his diet. And then they would end up, back to that comfortable, safe spot again.
Mm-hmm. Do you think some of it, even on a woman's side, and maybe even if it's not the weight loss, but in this case, the woman, could some of that be subconscious?
Yeah, it was completely subconscious.
Oh.
She was not doing that intentionally. She was reacting to the discomfort she felt in seeing him change. And rather than speak about that and say, okay, I'm so proud of you, but then what does it mean for me? I feel left behind, or it's about being vulnerable. But to be able to be vulnerable and have that kind of conversation, again, you have to feel comfortable with who you are.
And you have to have the awareness of the change happening.
Yes.
What's another step if someone's maybe listening and they see themselves in a similar situation where they're really struggling with the growth that their partner's having and they're not having? What could they do to, I want to say catch up, maybe that's not the right word, but get on the same page?
So this is what's interesting. And, a lot of people talk about soulmates, and they have this idea of like, oh, if I meet my soulmate, it's going to be problem-free and it's going to be romantic forever for the rest of our lives and sunsets every night. That is not what a soulmate relationship is. A soulmate relationship really at its best is somebody who is all relationships. You are a mirror to one another, right? I mean, I love when people think that you're going to move in together. Again, this is one of the illusions. It's going to be romantic and you're living together now. Well, actually, your partner sees things that they hadn't seen before, maybe things that we were even trying to hide from one another, right? So now everything that you used to do in private is for somebody else's viewing, the good, the bad, the ugly. So when you realize that your partner is your mirror, that's going to create a lot of change. That's going to create a lot of growth. And again, some of it's uncomfortable, but ultimately, if it's a healthy relationship, it's going to be growth that's amazing. So if you see that your partner is moving forward, again, it's not fair to ask them to slow down or to wait, but you can ask them to share their journey with you. But also, I think it's about time to really stop and say, okay, all these things I am expecting my partner to do for me. Because there has to be, if you feel like you're being left behind and they're moving forward, it's more about, this goes back to the relationship you have with yourself than your relationship. So you have to go back to those first 9 chapters and say, okay, what is it that's making me uncomfortable? What is it that I desire? What am I afraid of? If my partner keeps going in that, what does that bring out in me? And what are my options now?
One of the Kabbalah teachings that I learned and was just like an aha moment for me was that people are placed in our lives for our soul to grow and to learn and to continue our journey. And that made me see my relationship with my husband so differently. Our souls came together to learn and to grow from each other. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I'll give you an example. With my husband and I, we have been married 22 years. And we got married very young. And we joke about it that it's like we got really lucky that it worked out because we were so young. We had like zero experience between the two of us. But I think that it did work out because what we desired out of life and what we really found to be important was the same, right? We believed in spirituality, in growth, in transformation. And we also had a lot of laughter and levity. So those were like the most important things. They are really the most important things in a relationship. But if I look at who he was and who I was at that time, we're different people today. Now, why does that work, right? Because that could be scary. Well, what if you change? I mean, what if you change and that change grew you apart? The difference here is, for instance, he is a scholar, and he always had his nose in a book from the day I met him. I mean, I joke about how he would like walk and read. I'm surprised he didn't bump into people and walls. And I had a very different upbringing. I went to Beverly Hills High School. I was a bit more wild, and I was like drinking and dancing, you know, like we're just very different. So I was more outwardly social. But when we were together, you know, he was so funny and charismatic, and he was really, really social, but nobody got to see that part of him. They just connected to his teachings. And with me, I was this outgoing person, but to sit down and be disciplined and study, I was not. So what we started to bring out in each other was this, you know, he encouraged me to study more. I mean, would I have authored so many books? I don't know. I mean, it's my second one. I'm working on my third and fourth. I mean, he really awakened something in me. And because he believed in me in that way, it helped me kind of grow in that perspective. And for him also, I would tell everybody, you know, he is so funny. He's so charismatic, and I would encourage him. And now he's like the most outgoing. I mean, people think he's more outgoing than I am. So in the best relationships, you bring out this transformation in one another. And the only thing though that has to be said is that they have to want that same thing for themselves. And I talk about this in the book. It's called, there's the Michelangelo Phenomenon and the Golem effect. So the Michelangelo Phenomenon is that you have the same vision for your partner that they have for themselves, and you bring that out. And that's how it works. But if, you know, if for instance, he wanted me to become Marilyn Monroe and I wanted to be Joan of Arc, you could see how that would be an issue.
Yes.
And that's what the golem effect. That's when you want to create something else out of your partner than they want to be. Yeah.
And I think that happens a lot in relationships where the person is planning to change the other person. And that's not what any of this is about.
No. And that's why we have to be so specific when we talk about change, when we talk about growth. Don't set yourself up and get in a relationship and think, okay, it's okay for now. I don't love this, but once we get married, he or she will change.
That doesn't work.
No.
Let's talk about some of the illusions you talk about in the book, the illusions that people have around their relationships.
It will always be romantic. Or if we have children, it will guarantee we stay together forever. Once we're married, I'll feel secure in the relationship. I mean, if you felt insecure before, you're going to feel even more insecure after, because people usually are in their best behavior before the wedding, you know? And I talk about my own illusion in the book that I didn't have, and mine wasn't particularly dangerous because I didn't have an illusion about who I married, but I had an illusion about who I would be in a marriage. So because he was a scholar and he basically was born into a spiritual home, and he was, you know, spiritual since birth, I joke about, but pretty much I had this illusion that I would suddenly be elevated spiritually by just marrying him. So imagine my surprise a few years into the marriage. I was like, wait, what's happening here? This is not how I expected it to be. But I was able with that information to break the illusion and then again, work on that myself. The illusions are dangerous when you really marry for the wrong kinds of reasons. Like you know, you married somebody maybe for their money or for stability. And let's say you get married and then that person loses their money and the stability is gone. So then what are you left with?
Right. And the one that struck me, because I've seen this in a lot of people, is that adding kids to the mix is going to change things. Talk to me a little bit about that one.
Right. You know, kids are amazing. I have 4, so I obviously think that it's great and I enjoy being a mom. But if your relationship is rocky before you have a child, that first year is difficult. In fact, women lose 700 hours of sleep the first year the child's born. Okay. Do you know how that feels? Like to be without sleep and also, you know, your sex life changes for a bit. There's milk coming out of places. I mean, there's like a lot of things that are changing for you. So it's definitely not romantic and sexy, and the relationship shifts. But also, again, you lose sleep, maybe the child's colicky. I mean, there's all kinds of things that come up. So it could be very stressful. So actually that puts a big strain on a relationship if it doesn't have a strong foundation to begin with.
Why do you think so many people buy into these illusions?
Well, a lot of it is because, you know, through poetry and movies and film and books, that is our culture, right? So we buy into that illusion for sure. And we think that that's how it's going to be. But again, if you don't have a relationship with yourself and you don't really enjoy your life and you're just waiting for once you find the one, right? Again, if that's your belief system, then you put a lot of expectation into that time of your life, right?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people I know, they're like in their 20s and even 21, and I just want to get married. And it's just like, what do you, no, if you're not happy right now, you're not going to be happy then.
As you look at the illusions and you talk about the illusions, even just talking about having the kids, it's very obvious to see that's not going to solve your problems, not going to make your relationship better, et cetera, et cetera. But yet we still are watching the shows and the TV and the poetry, like you mentioned, and we're buying into that instead of what's obviously in front of us. Why do you think that disconnect happens between what our minds can think and what we're reading?
It takes a lot of work, like those first 9 chapters, to really learn to love yourself and to be authentic and to dare to say, I want this, without shame, without blame, without, and I got to this place because I developed an eating disorder when I was 17, and I got married at 23. So in those years, right before Michael and we had met, but there was no sparks. Those 5 years or so, I did a lot of work on myself. And I remember I was so lonely at the time, and I was craving to be loved, because an eating disorder is a very isolating disorder. And I had the thought, though, and I realized that what I was looking for, what I was craving for somebody else, could never come from someone else, and that I needed to do that for myself. So I took it very seriously. I mean, I started journaling. I started to feel my feelings instead of numbing them, right? And I started to feed myself instead of killing myself. Like I took self-love and self-care to the highest order. And in doing that, then I was able to draw the relationship. So I basically shattered the illusion. You have to know that this is not real. And once you know something, then you can do something about it. It's the knowing that has to come first.
Yeah. And I love that journey you talked about of your own self-love. For someone listening who's not there loving themselves, you mentioned journaling. What else can they do to get on that path?
I think that you need to be kind to yourself. So that punishing voice that comes out day to day, you don't deserve love. You're not good enough. You don't deserve good things. That shame that comes out, because if you're harming yourself in some way, whether it's through alcohol or food or lack of food or drugs, or choosing bad partners, right? We all have these kinds of self-sabotaging behaviors. Then you don't love yourself fully, right? So first you have to recognize those negative thoughts and beliefs. You have to pay attention to them, because they'll be fleeting. And that's why the journaling really is important, for that reason. And then you have to replace those negative thoughts with the opposite, even if you don't believe it in that moment.
Yeah.
Because you're basically, your mind is an obedient servant. And if you decide, then your mind's going to follow. And it's going to create situations that support what you believe. So if you believe you deserve nothing, well, your mind's actively going, and we're not going to do anything. But if you actually retrain yourself, you're going to awaken. And not just the opportunities are there, but you'll be able to see them and identify them.
And say it before you believe it. I think that's hard for a lot of people, but that's key. I love that. Okay. I want to read part of your book. You write, we have the tendency in our culture to treat friendships and life partners as a commodity or an investment. We put something in with the expectation that we'll get something out. When we don't get what we expected, the disappointment we feel inevitably feels very personal, so we blame our partners for our unhappiness. Tell me a little bit more about this. I just think I loved how you put it as a commodity and as an investment. We're expecting something in return.
Absolutely. And I think that this happens mostly, again, when you get comfortable in the relationship, whether it's 3 years, 4 years, as it goes on, you appreciate less and less, and you feel that they owe you more and more. And that, if they're your partner, your husband, your wife, then they should do this. You stop seeing them as their own person, and you see them as somebody who's supposed to fulfill all of your wants, desires, needs, hopes, dreams, etc. And the big danger here is when you lose appreciation through a lot of expectation. For instance, you feel like the love is lost, and it's not lost. You just can't access it anymore. So you stop appreciating, you stop seeing them for who they are. You stop seeing their essence, and they're just more of a means to an end. And nobody really wants to admit that, right? Because it sounds ugly and it sounds selfish, but that's really what happens. And it's human nature. It's human nature to lose appreciation for things. And that's why it's so important to consciously awaken it.
Yeah. Oh, this, it's as easy as starting to appreciate. Thank you so much. I can't believe we're already out of time. I
Wow, that
could
was so
continue to
fast.
talk about this. I just would encourage all the listeners to go check out your book because it really is. It's incredible. I loved everything you wrote. I want to end with my very last question, which is, this podcast is all about finding more joy in the everyday. What is your number one tip to finding more joy in the good, the bad, and the in-between?
Well, the key is that there's joy in everything because the good, the bad, the in-between is all good. And I fundamentally believe that. So if you see that every situation that happens in your life is an opportunity for growth and a great gift, sometimes it's in a paper bag and it's not in pretty ribbons, but it's still a gift. And if you have that mentality, then anything that happens to you actually happens through you instead.
Mm.
And that's the most rewarding thing, because at the end of anything, when you see something all the way through, even if it's uncomfortable, the amount of joy you feel after, the amount of respect you have for yourself and appreciation is beyond.
Oh, I love that. My life has truly changed as I've looked through it through a lens of growth, and focusing on the growth has really changed me for sure. So thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you for coming on the
Yeah.
podcast. And
Thank
I
you.
just appreciate your time. Just loved it.
Thank you. Thank you. It's fun.
I hope you enjoyed listening to Monica. She had so many great insights. If you want to hear more, just check out her brand new book, Rethink Love, Being the One, Attracting the One, and Becoming One. You can find that link to that book in show notes. And I want to thank you for being here on Happiness in Progress.